Hello, welcome to Greater Good Entrepreneur. I'm Jim Verzino. Today we've got Danielle Carruthers. I love that Danielle once slid on her bum down a volcano in the southern tip of Chile. In addition to that, through her organization, thesedge.org, she's helped hundreds of social entrepreneurs start their own businesses and nonprofit organizations all over the world. Welcome, Danielle. Welcome to Greater Good Entrepreneur.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, yeah. I love your story. Start us out. Tell us about what is thesedge.org?
Sure. So The Sedge is a global community based online, and we have social entrepreneurs from around the world, and the goal is to connect people together to build their skills and talents in social entrepreneurship. So there's some training components, there's some community components, and in the end, I just want it to be a platform that helps social entrepreneurs take their impact to the next level.
Cool. How is it that, here at Greater Good Entrepreneur, we talk a lot about people's own stories. How is it that you ended up getting into this? Had you started your own socially conscious business first? Give us sort of a little bit of your story there on how you ended up doing that.
Sure. So this is actually a fun story because the truth is, when I first started studying university, I was in science and I thought I was going to be an optometrist. So I was a little bit different from where I've ended up now, but it was such a blessing because what I really loved about science was this passion for depth and understanding and exploration. And but one thing I didn't enjoy was the black and white of the science study. So actually what happened completely by accident, I ended up working for a very small entrepreneurial company one summer just as a summer job. And I realized, you know what? These guys get to solve problems every day, all day as part of running their business. And that was so appealing to me. It brought in that level of creativity and innovation, but was still paired with that practice of understanding and depth, understanding your customers, understanding what you're doing as a business. So that was such a blessing, and I actually totally switched degrees and in my new program found my tribe of social entrepreneurs. And the cool thing about that was that we weren't calling ourselves social entrepreneurs at the time. So, we were studying business, but also in a student club, working really hard in the community to take what we were learning at school and applying it to issues that were relevant in our community. And as you know, that's a huge element. That's the value of being a social entrepreneur. And so I didn't realize this till much later, but looking back, that was really the foundation of building my passion for what I do now. And part of it was, starting to step out of my comfort zone as a university student, doing these projects within my community. For example, at one point we taught budgeting and financial literacy skills to a group of women who were previously on the streets trafficking themselves. And so just to be in that room with those women and see their eyes light up as we're talking about budgeting, I mean, it's not the most exciting thing, but to me, I loved that stuff. And I thought I could see the transformation in front of me and see how this was going to impact their lives for a long time. And so, that feeling of sharing knowledge and connecting and empowering others to be their better selves, that was really what brought me to what I'm doing now.
Cool. It's really amazing. It's kind of the boring stuff that really is the stuff that makes things work, right? It's not as exciting, but it's the day-to-day, call it the grind if you want to, whether it's getting your budgeting correct or making sure you sit down and write those blog posts, whatever it is. Those are the things that really make it work. I mean, it's very exciting to work on vision, and I'm sure you do a lot of that at the Sedge, but where the success comes from is the day-to-day grind. And
Yes.
That sounds really exciting. Another thing you mentioned was we didn't call it social entrepreneurship back then. We really didn't have a name for it. I don't know when back then was for you, but there hasn't really been a name for it. And even now, the term social entrepreneur it's difficult for a number of reasons. One being, most people, 80% at least in the US, probably 90%, have never even heard of the term. When I've been on planes and things like that, talking to
Yes.
people that I do a show on social entrepreneurship, they always think of social media.
Hmm.
And even when you Google social entrepreneur or use it in a search term, social media things come up, and it comes up with entrepreneurs that have started social media companies. So it's kind of a loaded term right now. And actually, that's how I came up with greater good entrepreneur, was social entrepreneur just wasn't working. Is that a challenge that you found, and how have you been dealing with it?
Yes, no, that's a great point, and it's I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with this ongoing discussion about terminology and
Mm.
definitions, because on one hand, it's a really important discussion to have, and it's also a great sign that this area of interest is growing, and people are challenging some of these conceptions and just want to have a better understanding of what it's all about. So not just social entrepreneur being unknown or maybe misunderstood in the online world, but even within the social entrepreneurship realm, people are constantly debating, well, what is a social enterprise versus a social business versus social innovation? Like there's so many layers, and I think in the end, what I've found, I've had several experiences where the communication can come to a bit of a halt because of some of that terminology. And in my experience, the best thing to do is really to get under the layers. And what I found is that usually we are kind of talking about the same thing, but we might be blocked on some of the terminology. And so, my suggestion around that for people just getting into the space or interacting with people who might not know quite as much about the scope or the landscape is to, don't let that deter you or get under your skin. Just embrace it for part of what we get to talk about right now, and have that deeper discussion. And then I'm sure you'll arrive at the understanding where everybody's on the same page.
It's almost as if don't let it get in your way. Just do what
Yeah.
you need to do. Gets back to do your homework, do your due diligence, and it'll still work. It doesn't matter if it's a social entrepreneur or whatever terminology you use. What I'd like to do actually is I want to learn more about thesedge.org and what
Hmm.
you do, and then I want to step back and learn about your journey of starting it out and getting to where you are now with an organization that's got hundreds of people all over the world working together while working on their own. So can you start us out by just telling us what the Sedge is, and maybe we can bring up your website as well and learn a little about that?
Sure. So essentially, it's gone through a few evolutions, and I like to talk about this because I want other people to know that the first vision of your social enterprise does not, most often will not be what ends up working in the end. And I think it's important to have that discussion and awareness. So the Sedge is definitely no different. It has the same challenges and roadblocks and hurdles that every social entrepreneur has. So that said, originally the site was envisioned to be kind of more of a social platform like a LinkedIn or a Facebook, but exclusively for social entrepreneurs. And as I worked with that, I found that there were a few issues with that model. And so it's been evolving since then. And now, really, the focus is on education. And so we have, on one hand, people can join and kind of raise their hand as someone who wants to engage in this community by placing themselves on our map, which is a fun way to see the spread geographically of everybody who's in touch with the sedge.
Would you mind if
I
I
think,
showed the map?
sure, that'd be great.
Okay, let me do this. There we go. Okay, so let's see. We're on the sedge.org here. You can't see that, but our viewers can. And let me get to where is the map? Is that under the member area?
Yep, meet our members
Meet our
under the
members.
member
Ah, there
area.
we go. Okay.
So this is actually just, one small piece of the website, but I've kept it up so far just because I think it's, on more than one occasion, people have contacted me and said, "Hey, I came across the site and it was so cool to see how many people are on this map." And to be honest, there's not much more to it than that, raising your hand and being part of the community. But just to know that there's that many people out there working on similar things with similar values, I think, one of the reasons I started the Sedge was because I was that person feeling very isolated in my local community. and had a lot of interest in the topic. And although there was some things going on, I wanted more depth. I wanted more connection, and I was looking for those like-minded people around the world. So that's partially, why this part of the Sedge evolved to be what it is.
Yeah, and we can see took a minute for it to come up, but we can see dots. Every one of these dots represents a member, or maybe a couple of members in a region.
Yep, a member for sure who's staying in touch. This is one piece of the community, but Jim, actually, how you and I met is through another community that's co-hosted with a friend of mine, the Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is where really a lot of action happens in terms of having conversations with people from around the world. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I've been really. By the way, you're back on the screen now. I'm off the website, at least for the moment. I've been really impressed with that particular community. I'm in several online communities that have to do with social entrepreneurship and B corporations and things like that. And so far, that's the one that I've found that really has the most interactive group of any that I've found, where people are really getting out there and helping themselves. And what is it again? I just find it on my Facebook thing. What is it again? What's it called?
Yeah, so it's officially the Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab
Okay,
on
Global Social
Facebook.
Entrepreneurs Lab on Facebook. Let's get back to your story and what the Sedge is. So it started out as a community site, and then the community needed education. Is that how it sort of got to where it is now?
Yeah, exactly. So what I learned earlier on was that community is awesome, and that's something I'm really passionate about. That's a key value. Like I think people learn really well when they can connect with others going through a similar journey. But a community is also very organic and elusive, and it needs to happen on its own. And so I wanted to create something more tangible for people to engage in. And then the community is a wonderful byproduct that we all get to enjoy from that. And so, really, the focus right now is on creating resources and training that is directly applicable for the specific challenges that social entrepreneurs face. Because, as you know, there's a lot of elements like your branding, your communication, the channels, distribution, staffing. I mean, all of the challenges that apply to traditional business, plus a whole host of other ones that need to weave in and out and complement and reinforce some of those key practices from traditional business as well. So it's definitely a unique field of learning from what
Right.
I've seen. Yeah.
I want to talk about something that social entrepreneurs and a lot of people don't like talking about, and that is money.
I love talking about money.
You do? Cool. All right. Well, that's good. How does the Sedge make money? Or what was your process in getting there? If you started out as a community, was your expectation initially that there was going to be a charge for membership and now you charge for education? How does the Sedge make money, and how do you live now?
Yes, good question. So initially, the idea was to build a bit of a base and this community, and then look at potentially monetizing on a membership type of structure. And really, at that time, it wasn't the best fit in terms of, I think the discussion around social entrepreneurship has really grown exponentially, even in the last 2 years or 2.5 years since I first started the Sedge. And so it's interesting because today is kind of a different landscape than it was when I first started.
Which was only 2.5 years ago, just to clarify.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I would agree the landscape's changed a lot in just that time. Continue.
Yeah. So essentially, right now the revenue model is to pay for courses, and they're online. And I also did some group coaching as well, along with an online course component. So I've definitely played around with different structures for delivering that material in a way that is working for social entrepreneurs. For example, the very first pilot of Boost Academy, which is a 6-week course for social entrepreneurs that goes from kind of start to finish what you need to think about and explore for your social enterprise. The first pilot was 5 people from, I believe, 4 continents.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was really cool to have that diversity in such a small group too. But it also came with a lot of challenges in terms of time zones, internet connectivity, And I was really excited about this group interaction component. As I said before, I that's a key value of mine in terms of learning from your peers and exploring, not from a consultant who has all the answers. That's not who I am. I want to be a kind of a facilitator that empowers you to find your own answers with the help of the resources and your peers and myself.
Hmm.
So it's more of like a team collaboration. And but yeah, essentially there were challenges getting live groups together who are spread out across the world.
Right. Okay.
So yeah.
And now, is it fully funding your lifestyle? Do you have to do other work to help fund your lifestyle, or are you there yet? I mean, this is a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not fully funding my lifestyle right now, but what I am happy to say is that I'm able to take on contract work that's still incredibly related to what I do at the Sedge. So I do, for example, I'm working with a nonprofit here in Calgary where I live on a new social enterprise cafe. So I'm helping them with the business planning on that. And of course, all of this work is the same types of things that I teach through Boost, but with a tangible project. And then I'm learning more through that experience and with that case study that can then cycle back into the training. So it's hard to separate my work sometimes just because there's so many different things happening. But yeah, I can say the training on the Sedge is not fully funding my 40 hours a week, but that's the hope.
I think it's interesting that as we do this kind of work, because I do the same thing, we start to build this brand, even though your intent is to build the brand globally. The people right in your neighborhood or right in my neighborhood or within a couple hundred miles, they know what I do, and it's allowed the ability to, even when I'm not doing the things in my business that I would love to do the most, it brings it closer and closer. So yeah, doing business planning for a coffee shop that has some sort of socially conscious mission as well is still really great, exciting work.
Yes,
It's not like
totally.
you're creating a website for Pepsi Cola or something like that, right? It's still great stuff. So I think
Yep.
that's an important thing for people out there to hear is that once you start down the road, you really don't know what's going to come your way, and that's part of what's exciting about it.
Yes.
And also your impact is amazing. So even if you're not making all your money the way that you imagine would be the perfect way, because none of us probably ever do, right? Anybody that owns a business is always
Yeah.
trying to move that business. So,
Exactly.
and the impact you're having just by seeing all the people you have on the website and what you're doing in the Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab, your impact is amazing. So that's really cool. I do want to go and look at your website again because there was something really interesting on there, and that was your Idea Finder workshop. So I'm guessing you have some methodology for how you get people to generate ideas. Would you like to give us
Yes.
I'm curious actually, would you like to give us? I'll say I'm curious. What is your methodology, right? Can you give us a little
Yeah.
sneak peek of, it's funny. People have different sets of problems when it comes to ideas. Some people have way too many,
Too many.
and
Yeah.
some people don't have enough. Almost nobody lives in the middle, right? It's either every day I get 3 or I got none. So talk to me
Yeah.
about your Idea Finder workshop. I'm really curious.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this was a very common question and kind of discussion item that came up in my conversations with people was, okay, social enterprise as a concept is wonderful. I think we all agree that this is a very useful goal and place to strive to be. But sometimes there's quite a large gap, in fact, most of the time, between that idyllic goal of social enterprise where you are creating revenue that supports a social or environmental mission, and then where you are now. And so, how do you get that ball rolling? And it can be very intimidating and scary. And the other challenge is if you're a nonprofit or a charity, you already have a whole organization. You have your values, your mission, everything is very much set up. And then how do you take that entity and try and build in another leg or another arm or weave in the social enterprise component. So it's kind of two different challenges. One is starting without any organization, but wow, the gap is really large. I don't even know where to start. And then the other one is how do we weave these two ideas together? And so, really, the Idea Finder workshop goes through a method of some creative brainstorming through some different exercises. And actually, I should say, before we get to the brainstorming, it's really looking inward at your own values and goals for yourself and your life and your career, and also outward at your goals for your vision for change. And what is your social or environmental mission? What's a cause that you really connect with? You have to be clear on those things first, and not just one or the other, but both. Your inward vision, for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then also that outward social impact piece. So yeah, that's step one. And then step two is some creative brainstorming, where essentially we're going through things like pains and painkillers. So, looking at different stakeholders that you might want to work with. What are the challenges each of those stakeholders are dealing with? What are some crazy solutions you can come up with? So it's really letting yourself be wide open and creative and think outside the box, to be super cliche, and really not limit yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's phase two. And then phase three is starting to bring it back in. Because for the people like myself and maybe you too, Jim, who have lots of ideas every day, the first step is not very tricky. It's like, okay, I can dream up, 20 different things I could do. But then what's really important is to start thinking about your criteria. What's important for your social enterprise? And that could be very different for every person or any nonprofit who is looking at these ideas. What are you actually trying to accomplish? And not just on the mission side, but also on the financial side. We don't want to shy away from that either.
Yeah, and just in your own whole personal life, right? I mean,
Yes,
financial as well
work life.
as your relationships.
Yeah.
I do a lot of environmental consulting, and it's a ton of travel, and that
Mm.
really hurts other parts of my life,
Yeah.
the community part of my life, really. So it's quite a challenge. Anyhow, continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's terrible.
No, no, that's exactly what I was getting at. That and it's going to be different for every person.
Right.
Someone else might think, travel is really important to me at this moment, and it would be a dream come true if I had a business or social enterprise that would allow me to travel all the time. So it's a very personal exploration, and then really it's about systematically going through kind of your top ideas and checking them off against these criteria, and it's a creative yet efficient way to arrive at maybe your top 1 to 3 ideas. And then
Hmm.
you can take those and really get into the nitty gritty on fleshing them out and validating them and see if they're going to work. So it's even the phase of exploration before you start taking action.
The idea of validation, that's great. So they've done all this work, and yet their risk has been minimal because you still are having them
Yes.
do idea validation, so they're not pouring tens of thousands of dollars in there before they realize, oh, even though I just went through this whole 6 or 8 week process, oops, nobody wants to buy the thing that I want to sell.
Yes, and that's the classic first entrepreneur's biggest mistake, and that's a huge kind of
First,
mind shift that I love to talk about in terms of being really aware of how to handle that situation, so that you don't pour all this time and energy into something that ultimately is not going to be of value or of service or financial gain to anybody.
right? If you only had to make that mistake once, then great. I know plenty of people, myself included, that have made that mistake plenty of times. So,
Yes, you're right. I should have said it that way.
no, it's quite all right. It's a great lesson. Anyhow, let's go back to since we're on the subject here. Other things that I'm back to your website here. Other things that the Sedge does. Should I go and see Join Boost Academy or about our programs to see really more of what the Sedge does?
Join Boost is good.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll leave a little hint in that I am working on a redesign of the website, so it will look different over the next couple months in terms of streamlining things and also bringing some new exciting offerings to the mix as well.
Oh, I got to say, I actually, I like the, in general, look and feel. I kind of like it, actually. I think it's kind of neat.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Impact Compass Workshop Series. Okay, so we've basically got several classes here for people that want to pursue social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so primarily at this point, what we just talked about, the Idea Finder workshop, is a 2 hour workshop that you can do on your own. 2 hours of me on camera, but also with a workbook with that guides you through that process that I just talked about. And so that's kind of a starting point. But if somebody wanted to get into a lot more depth with their plan, so maybe they're a little clearer on their idea and want to move forward through that validation stage and going through their marketing and communication plan and even taking a deep look at how they're going to evaluate their impact, that's the full 6-week Boost Academy program.
What do you talk about, or how do you talk to your students about measuring their impact and sort of that side of the equation? Because that's one of the tough things that, it doesn't always have to be a balancing act, but it certainly can be, right? So how do you talk to your students and how do you coach them on measuring impact?
Yes, good question. And it's funny because really that's a whole field of study within itself. It's it doesn't do it the whole activity justice to say we can solve it in an afternoon. It really can get quite complicated, as you know. But that said, it doesn't mean that you can't start small and you don't have to do a full, randomized trial study to prove out your impact. There are other ways you can really just think through your theory of change. So that's one thing that we talk about a lot in terms of, and if you're not familiar, this is a framework that's used a lot in the nonprofit sector. And so naturally it's very useful for social enterprise as well, because it's really thinking through how do your day-to-day actions that you are spending, X amount of time with your beneficiaries or your clients or on this task or that task, how do those things add up day over day over day into the long-term impact that you're trying to get? And this is not necessarily a cut and dry evolution. That's why they call it the theory of change. And it has, 4 levels, and you're thinking logically. It's also called a logic model. Depending who you ask, they might say those are different, but they're quite similar. And you're really just, asking yourself some tough questions about the assumptions that you make. So you're going towards this long-term vision for change, and then you're making your strategic plan and you're doing your to-do list every day. So how can you be sure that those things are really going to translate? And you need to ask yourself the tough questions at every step to ensure that you can have a reasonable level of comfort that they are going to, and not only ask yourself the questions, but set up ways to test your questions and try and answer them.
So I'm curious, and this is probably a little curveball here. So I'll apologize ahead of time. How do you do this for yourself?
Yeah, that's a curveball. No, that's a good question.
Oh, never even considered that.
No, it's a very interesting question because the funny thing about working online is that you can track so many numbers, but as you know, and as I know, like I just said, do any of those numbers mean anything in terms of growing the skill set and capacity of social entrepreneurs that are in touch with the SEDGE and myself? And so, yeah, it's a work in progress. I would say so this might not be as by the book as it should, but what I really value is hearing feedback from individuals. And so I know that you can't apply that as a blanket element of proof for what you're doing, but it's definitely a great signpost. And I think when you're working with people one-on-one or in a community, getting those thank you notes or
right.
That aha moment that they share with you after we've been talking about something, that means the world to me in terms of impact right now.
It's so funny. Well, it's not funny, but just in hearing your story, I can think of course, I'm a kind of an engineer geek, and I already just off the top of my head thought of 3 or 4 different ways to measure impact. What kind of businesses or nonprofits have you helped to start at this point? Because as an environmental consultant, for instance, I work a lot with big manufacturers, and I actually can have some very easy measurements, right? There was a couple of years that I actually tracked the amount of the tons of CO2 that did not go into the environment because of my work. Until it got to,
that's so tangible.
thousands and thousands, right? And I used to use this in sales presentations until one day a CFO said to me, you know what? We don't really care about that. Like, we're happy that you did it, but we don't really care that you did. Right, I care. They don't really care.
Yeah.
So I was like, thank you, Mr. CFO. But what kind of businesses are you working with? What are your customers coming to you and saying these are the kind of businesses or nonprofits that we want to start?
So there's an interesting one. I worked with a gentleman who's based in South Africa, and he calls himself an inventor, and he certainly is. He's a classic entrepreneur. He's started quite a few different initiatives that I don't even fully understand or know about, I'm sure. And he was really starting to get interested in the social element and wanted to use his inventor and entrepreneurial skills to apply to a social challenge. And he had worked a lot with mobile networks. And so it's interesting because even his idea is hard for me to wrap my head around. But that was one thing I could help him with, was simplifying in certain areas along the way. For example, he wanted to launch his mobile network, which had an element of collaboration and giving within it. It was kind of like a social network through the cell phones. And it would help to alleviate poverty and improve, economic prosperity of those on the network. So he had such big plans, and he said, we'll launch it across South Africa, and then we'll launch it in Canada, and we'll launch it here, like country by country. And you're dealing with major infrastructure. So there are some challenges in terms of how do we scale this in a way that's manageable and test out the idea without, taking over the world all at once.
Right.
So it's interesting to see so many different types of business models, because that's one that he has this expertise in how to implement that type of business. And even though I don't have the depth of expertise, we can still have a really great discussion about, well, why do you want to do it that way? Is there maybe a simpler way to start? Can you break this goal down into smaller steps? How can you tackle it in a way that gives you greater chance of success?
And are most of your customers, are they bootstrappers?
Yes, at this point.
Okay, cool. So another interesting thing that people come to me with quite often, and I'm curious to hear how you answer it, is should I start a for-profit or a nonprofit? And it's amazing how people get stuck on this. What have you experienced with your clients and those kind of discussions around that?
Yes, this is another classic question that gets talked about a lot, and which is great. And the interesting thing with that is that it's different in every part of the world, in terms of what's available to you legally. And so it's quite interesting, as you mentioned B Corps earlier, and that's an amazing tool that's growing, the certification can be applied no matter where you are in the world. But if you want to be a B corporation as a legal entity, you can only do that in certain places. And so there's, I think it's definitely worth taking the time to sit down with someone in your city to talk about, okay, even before we start thinking about what we want to choose, what are the options?
Right.
That's the first step. Because, even that is really confusing to lay out what are my options.
You're in Canada, so I'm guessing that you have tax laws different than we are here in the United States, even on those kinds of things, right? Okay.
Yeah. So, but what I like to talk about in terms of this question is that, don't let this question be a block before you start taking action and figuring out your business.
Thank you. Because people will sit on this for a year
Yeah, but you know what? It doesn't do you any good because what if you, as we mentioned earlier, the first vision of your business before you take action is not going to be the one that works.
Right.
You know, you have to get started, you have
Of
to
course.
play around, you have to meet your customers and your beneficiaries, you have to pilot, prototype, whatever you can do to start gaining more confidence that you're on the right track. And
I hate to interrupt, it's a terrible
yeah,
habit, but I loved
no,
the way you talked about your customers and your beneficiaries, which can be two
mhm.
different things, which is a nomenclature that most people just don't even understand that nomenclature, that they don't necessarily have to even be the same thing.
Yes, no, for sure. And
So,
you have to understand how they might be different or they might not, and you don't know until you start. You know, you really, I feel, need to do that experimentation first and then start to feel confident with something that's working. And then you think about how to incorporate because now you know what you're dealing with.
right.
You know, if you're more on the nonprofit side where you'll be seeking more donations or it makes sense to work with certain partners that want you to be a nonprofit. You know, if that's a really important piece of your whole picture, you need to know that first before you make that decision about incorporating or whatever status you're going to apply for.
Yeah. What I found really interesting is the psychological, I'm going to use the term blocks, even if that's not right, the correct term exactly. The psychological pictures that people have in their mind
Mhm.
of business bad, nonprofit good. When really there's just different ways that you can take in money and take money out and just different legal pieces of it.
Yeah.
And I'm stunned at how often people talk to me about this subject and they they're looking at starting something and they're like it has to be it's got to be a nonprofit because I don't like corporations. And but by the same token, I'm like, well, if you start this not as a nonprofit because here are all the reasons not to, you could be making an impact in 2 months. There are people that have ideas like that can be implemented pretty quickly. You can have an impact in two months. If you try to do this as a nonprofit, it'll take you 9 months or a year while you wait for all these grant processes to happen. And
Hmm.
and I ran something at the Independent Television and Film Festival, and I was being interviewed by, and it was a for-profit entity that basically took social entrepreneurs and filmmakers, brought them together in kind of a mashup so that filmmakers had more interesting stories and the social entrepreneurs learned about storytelling. And it was a really, really interesting project. But anyhow, we did it as a for-profit, and when I got interviewed by a newspaper about it, the first question that I was asked by one of the very first questions by the reporter was, why did you choose to take the dirtier for-profit money rather than be a nonprofit? And I
The
was just
dirt
like,
pyramid.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I was just like, wow. So if I write you a check and you're a nonprofit, then I'm dirty. But if I write you a check and you're a for-profit, or other way around, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, it just goes to show sort of these strange prejudices that people have. And here in the United States, I just say, it's just an IRS designation. It doesn't really matter
Hmm.
other than how can you have the most impact and meet your goals the best. All the rest of it is just noise.
Yeah. It's just building blocks. It's like choosing your accounting software, you know, which tool is going to get you the best result for the type of business you have. And um, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. In fact, I had the pleasure of sitting down for lunch at the Social Enterprise World Forum a few years ago with the lawyer from the UK who was part of the strategic committee that designed the very first community interest company legal structure, which is the KIC, which is what most of the other legal structures around the world are modeled after because they've done a really great job. They're a few years ahead of some of the other areas. And she told me, you know, I would rather sit down with someone and see where they're at, and you know, if they've gone one direction, and it makes more sense to um, like if they're missing a piece that they need on the charitable side or the for-profit side, we can always make it happen.
Right.
Essentially, you know, the lawyers can, it might be slightly more work, but in the end, if you realize that you need some other element, you can make it happen some one way or another.
Right.
It's just tools.
It seems like you've gotten really down to the nitty gritty of this. It sounds like you've been talking to a lot of the right people, that you're networking with the right people. It's you've only been doing this 2.5 years?
Officially with the Sedge, yeah, but before that, I was always definitely involved in not only in my city, but as I said, there wasn't that much happening there at the time. But I was studying with for a social entrepreneurship certificate, and just always, yeah, gobbling up everything I could online
Well,
uh,
you,
to learn more.
your impact has been amazing. I think we're ready to close. Wait a minute. I'm wondering, actually, how did you end up sliding on your bum down a volcano?
Yeah, well, part of the Sedge origin story, which was such a treat, is that I founded the company um, down in South America as part of a business accelerator program. So get this, I get to quit my job, move to Chile, sit around for 6 months surrounded by other entrepreneurs working on globally reaching initiatives. Not all social enterprise, I might add. I was a bit of a black sheep in that segment, but still learned so much being around that type of crowd, online entrepreneurs, people doing really, really neat things. And so this volcano experience was one of our weekend trips. About 10 of us went down to check it out, and we were climbing snowy volcano one day and rafting on the river the next day and enjoying the beautiful Andes.
I think we're all good here. Anything else you want to get out there to the world? I do want to ask you about sort of how to be in touch with your organization and all that. But before we do that, any words of wisdom for our social entrepreneurs in our audience?
Good question. I think if I can just talk personally about my biggest learning throughout this whole adventure, which has been so much fun, and I'm excited for it to continue, is that really it's ourselves that hold us back, if anything. And if you can learn to tackle your own mindset almost in a way, you can accomplish so much. And the reason I say that is this idea of being afraid to move forward or to take action or to reach out to that person you're really interested to talk to, or just to test out an idea. We always come up with all these reasons why it won't work, or no, they don't want to talk to me, or this, that, and the other thing. And really, if I could leave our listeners with one thing, it's just do it. Just do it. And then you've done it, and then it's done. It's great.
Look fear in the eye.
Yeah.
And don't let fear stop you, which it does for so many of us, myself included many times. Okay, so there's the Global Social Entrepreneur Lab on Facebook, right?
Yes.
And then your website. What is your website?
Yep. www.thedge.org. It's a bit of a tongue twister when you're speaking it. And there's a lot of resources on the website, so feel free to check those out. Not only the blog, but there's also some trainings. And through the Social Entrepreneurs Lab, we have some more exciting trainings and ideas coming up. In addition to, Jim, you may have found us through, we do a quarterly Q&A call. So that will continue to happen. And we just set some dates today, and it's going to be really a fun year.
Actually, I'm trying to think I think I had found Solane. Solane is kind of a partner of yours in the
Yes.
in the community, right? In the Facebook community. And actually, I think I found you initially because I found her on YouTube.
Oh, great.
I should text her this. I actually found her by going to YouTube, going into the search bar, and doing social entrepreneur webinar. And she came up one of the very first people. I don't know if she knows that. But so you also do what did you say you do? Quarterly, what was it?
Quarterly Q&A calls. So Selene and I got together more as just something fun for us to do for our communities, in terms of, hey, let's host a webinar, and I don't want to restrict it to what I want to teach. I want to hear what our listeners want to talk about. And so we kept it a very loose structure, and had so much fun on the first call that we decided to make it a quarterly event. And so we have some of those planned for 2016. So yeah, lots of fun.
Cool. All right. Well, I got to tell you, this has been super exciting. I love the stuff you're doing. That's it for Greater Good Entrepreneur. Go to Social Entrepreneur Lab, right? That's what it is, Social Entrepreneur Lab at
Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab.
Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab. It's just in my thing, so I just go to it. I never have to look. But Global Social Entrepreneurs Lab on Facebook. It's the best social entrepreneur community you're going to find. And thesedge.org. All right, we'll see you next time.